This Lunchtime speaker series has been made possible through the Center for Black Diaspora Studies, the Social Transformation Research Collaborative, the Healing Justice Dialogue Series, the Women's Center, and Women's and Gender Studies, the Center for Community Health Equity, Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies, and the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences of the Park. Our featured guest is Karen M. Rose, trained in Eastern and Western herbal medicine, master herbalist. Karen M. Rose is the owner of Sacred Vibes Healing and Sacred Vibes Apothecary. Her inspiration for this work began as a child in her native home of Essequibo, Guyana, where she was exposed to how African, Caribbean, and Latin American traditions profoundly influenced plant medicine and community healing. The legacy of these lands is the foundation of Karen Rose's spiritual and healing practice. A strong advocate of community partnerships in healing, she believes that all spiritual traditions offer guidance on the path to finding truth, and she has authored articles on the power and simplicity of herbs used to heal and nourish mind, body, and spirit. Her works have been featured in a variety of media outlets, including on The Feed, featuring culinary celebrity Marcus Samuelson, the New York Times, Black Enterprise Magazine, Organic Life, and the New York Daily News. She is also the author of The Art of and Practice of Spiritual Herbalism, Transform, Heal, and Remember with the Power of Plants and Ancestral Medicine, which addresses the physical mechanisms of the body systems and the magic of plants and diasporic ancestral practices that can be used to bring oneself back to healing and balance. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Could you hear me well?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Freeman. And thank you, Jennifer, for coordinating and having me here, and Dr. Freeman for this invitation to sit in your lunch series. I'm happy to be here. So over the next hour, I definitely want to talk a bit about my practice, and I'm looking forward mostly to the question part. So I know that I'm gonna talk until uh, let's see. I guess I'll be leaving 15 minutes for questions.
Yes.
It's about 1:15. That's great. Um, I guess thank you for the bio. When you read the bio, it feels third person to me. I'm like, oh wow. So sharing my own way, I would say the things that are most important in my world are my children and the work and my whole upholding my ancestors' promise or my legacy, are the things that are important to me. I live in Brooklyn and I have three children, two of which work at the apothecary with me. And my youngest one, Shiloh, he is in high school still. And I never believed that they'll be working at the apothecary, but they always somehow end up there because that's kind of where they were raised. My parents are still in Brooklyn also, and it feels good to practice in the community which you grew up. So I immigrated from Guyana in South America and also part of the Caribbean. I immigrated when I was 14 years old to Brooklyn, and my family lived in the Flatbush area of Brooklyn. And so when I decided to practice, that was obviously the area that I wanted to be in. Flatbush, Brooklyn has a great percentage of people of migrants that live from the Caribbean that live there from across the diaspora, and it felt really beautiful to be able to share with medicine with people from the diaspora. So I'm a first generation immigrant, and as such, you can only imagine the walk back to your authentic self, because I believe that, oftentimes when we arrive here, we start to forget the things that were the ways that we were raised and the healing modalities that were taught to us, because it's, for immigrant parents, the thing that they want their children to do is to get education, be raised the right way. And for them, education meant going to a school that was like for nursing or business, and really not a, in effect, abandoning a lot of the things that were taught to us, but they wanted to make sure that we had safety, that we were secure financially, and also could build families here. So I get it. But, I consider myself a medicine holder, and a medicine holder is someone who remembers the medicine of their family and then holds on to that medicine to pass it on to future generations. So I considered myself the medicine holder for my family, realizing how much of my grandmother's legacy stayed with me even through these changes that we had to make to acclimate to this space. So, growing up in the Caribbean um, felt like something that I cannot get out of my bones, and I never want to, because of that freedom that it creates for me. So I was born in my grandmother's house. I was 13 pounds and was delivered at home by a really skilled midwife. And my grandmother was the person who had so much plant knowledge that many people would often come to her and ask her. They called her auntie, and they would ask her for whatever, what was happening in their lives, what could they use. And I sat as a child and I would be listening to all these things that my grandmother were recommending. My grandmother also would send me or the little ones oftentimes to go get the plants. So, I knew every bush and every tree that existed in my grandmother's yard, and there were many. But this practice really allowed me to be in touch with the plants. It was like I was a part of this healing. So I feel like I was talking to plants from ever since I could remember. My grandmother is also one of those grandmothers that is super strict with children and is like strict and loving, and would tell us, at the morning time after breakfast, she would say, go out and play, because she wanted our house kept clean. So she would encourage us to go outside and play. And we wouldn't come back until it was time to eat again, like some of you may remember. But in that time, I used my time to be in trees, explore. And everywhere folks in the village say that you shouldn't explore was the place that I wanted to explore. So I had this, habit of going into the bush, just the bush that they told us not to go into, and encountering my own perception of what lies beyond this veil, right? What lies beyond our human veil. And so, this is where your eyes get to learn how to see. And I was, able to have that freedom as a child to really see beyond what we consider this dimension, from my wanderings and from having this grandmother that I could come back to and be like, I saw this thing. And she said, well, that's why you shouldn't go there. But this is the explanation. And so my grandmother raised me with a lot of myth and a lot of storytelling. Something that my mom did not encourage all the time, because my mom had embraced religion. And so my mom was like, what are you telling these kids? And my grandmother being like, it's the truth. They need to know this. Um, and my mom used religion as her explanation, and my grandmother used her stories, her encounter, her own practical story, her own personal stories, and the stories of her family as explanation. And so I always leaned into my grandmother's explanation, because I could not find any solace in the religious explanations that was given to me. So it was there that in this little village that Essequibo is about 10 miles, and it's on the coast, the Atlantic Ocean, the coast of the Atlantic Ocean in Guyana. And it's a small village, and most people know that, it's a small coast that's made up of multiple villages. And most people know each other and know what village you're from and where your grandmother is from and where your grandfather is from. What we didn't have in this village was access to a doctor. So a doctor would come into the village every now and then. And my mom was telling me that when she was growing up, that if you wanted to see a doctor in her village, when he did come to visit, you'd have to like hang something outside your house and they would stop by. But for by the time I was born, there was like a clinic and this doctor would come into it every, whenever. And there was a hospital, but it was several villages over that served the whole coast. So what people began to do is to rely on each other for healing. So what that looked like is that you'd have someone who specialized in the healing of babies. You'd have someone who specialized in digestive concern. You'd have someone who specialized in physical manipulation for like bones, your structural and your muscular system concern. And we started to know this way you know everyone that exists in the village. And there's this framework of healing that's within the village that's spoken about, like, who does what, right? And so I grew up going to a lot of these healers. So, there was the person who I would go to rub my belly whenever I had any digestive issues happening. And it seemed like I was the child that always was having, some like sprain in the digestive system from climbing trees or jumping out of trees. Something was always happening. And so I had, this elder in the village, her name was Sundar. And I loved to go to Sundar's house. I would be, like throwing up in pain, having gastro issues, and then leaving like perfectly, like able to walk and healthy. That it was so miraculous. Uh, and one of the things about Sundar was that my mom, I would tell my mom, I was like, Mom, do you remember when Sundar would heal me? I don't even know. Is Sundar still alive? I would say to my mom, and my mom would say, Sundar was old since I was a child. And I've just wondered how long has she been around and laying her hands on people this way and healing people in this way. So I got to witness what that felt like. I also got to witness what it felt like to, take a colicky baby who's not sleeping to the healer of babies and watch him really do spiritual healing for the baby who's suffering from colic, and then taking that baby home, who was my cousin, and my cousin would then like sleep through the night. So for me, spiritual healing was so tangible. It was super, super, it was like just as physical healing is tangible. So there wasn't a great divide in my learning about what's physical healing is and what spiritual healing is. It was only after arriving here that I understood that there was this big division, that people did not practice spiritual healing as part of the healing process. It was so separate from what was happening to us physically. I later found out that my grandfather on my father's side, Joshua, who's with me today, Joshua Rose was also a spiritual healer. My father never, really told me this. My father would tell me that Joshua was a balata bleeder. My grandfather Josh was a balata bleeder. Balata trees are really, really tall, and they're the trees that make rubber. And so my grandfather would climb these trees and extract rubber from them, but only a few people could do this because these trees, they were so intimidating. A lot of people lost their lives climbing these rubber trees, but my grandfather could do it. So that was his work, and he was a rice farmer. And one of the things that I remember is that my grandfather could suck rattlesnake poisoning out of someone who was dying with rattlesnake poisoning without poisoning himself. So he was known for extracting rattlesnake poison, but he also did a lot of healing with like crocodile teeth and just different things. So my grandfather is also a rich, rich legacy for me as a spiritual worker and a healer. So I don't want to forget Joshua. There was so much happening with plants that I just really fell in love with them, because what I saw that was in each time I went to someone's home who was conducting spiritual healing, nature was involved, plants were involved. And so, whether it was, going to get my stomach rubbed and, taking in. She would, Sundar was her name, and she would put like lemongrass oil on my stomach, and I could smell the lemongrass and the coconut oil that she would do. Like that memory is so intricate with her work. For me, that memory of the smell of the lemongrass on my belly and what that smelled like. And so plants were always part of what was happening in whether it was laying on the hands, whether it was like healing a colicky baby. Plants were so involved. So I myself grew this great affinity to plants that my mom, would was someone who always had a garden. And I remember in that garden, I would always have like my own little garden bed of things that I was growing. Some of them I knew the names of, and some of them I didn't. But I was feeding my cats these things. I was, just playing with them. I was completely engulfed in this world, and then to move here and have a completely different way of living. So when I came here, I guess what we had was what was available. So we used a lot of lemon and ginger, and to heal ourselves. Like most Caribbean, we believe in ginger for everything, right? But yeah, we used a lot of ginger and lemon when I arrived here, but we did not really get back into our plant work as a family. I didn't return to that plant work as a family until my daughter was born. When Lauren was born, she had a strep throat. And, I went to the doctor with her and they gave her a round of antibiotics. And then the antibiotics didn't work. It moved into scarlet fever. And so then they gave her another round of antibiotics. And for me, the question that I kept asking the doctor is, could you tell me, like, why wouldn't they work? What's going on? Like, and for them to really not have much of an answer other than we're going to try this next set of antibiotics. And I just felt like, wait, she's so little. She was about maybe 2 years then. And, between 18 months and 2 years. And I thought, like, there has to be another way. And so I called my grandmother, who was still alive at that time and living in Guyana. I called her and I said, you know, what should I use? And of course, the plant that she tells me, I was living in Arizona at that time, did not grow in a desert, right? So I was like, oh my God, I'm calling home to a tropical rainforest on the equator, and I'm asking for a plant, and I live in the desert. So no, this is probably not going to work. At that point, I realized that I needed to get to know the plants that existed around me. And so that's where my herbalism journey really began. I started to want to see what was the plants here that I could become, that I could be in relationship with, that then I could lean to for healing. And so I, started to study what's called Western herbalism. Through my study in Western herbalism, it took me back really to my ancestral medicine. So herbalism study here really opened up a space where I wanted to return to my ancestral medicine. And so I have ancestors that are from the Congo and Benin and Central Africa and also Ghana. My grandmothers are from China. And, my grandfathers, I have a grandfather who's from India. So there were so many mixing of indigenous cultures that were in me that it made me want to explore the medicine of my ancestors, because as I was learning this medicine, the thing was that no one was teaching me about what it means to connect spiritually. It was taught in a very allopathic way, kind of like this plant is for this, so take this, right? And that's what it felt like. And so returning to my ancestral medicine was what I was searching for, because only there could I find this deep connection back to spirit. So I started to travel and learn and go back to the Caribbean and go back home to Guyana and really sit with teachers and learn about some of the plants that I used there, and also the spirit that exists behind those plants, because I felt like this great disconnection had occurred. Um, I was also asked to talk about, like, so for me, you know, I was also asked to talk about, like, how do I feel like this medicine, this connection back to the ancestors is beneficial for who we are now, considering the things that we're faced with. And I think the most important part of that is to realize that community healing is what really makes you well. That there is not a place for wellness that's isolated or solo or distanced from what a community is. And that in community, that we don't have to know everything, that we can know what we know, and then rely on our communities to also carry the energy of their ancestors and bring forward their own knowing. And to me, that is really what it means to heal holistically, is to have all the members of community showing up in with their greatest uh, aspects in healing and then forming community. I feel like community is therefore a protection and can serve as a protection. Because when I look at the medical industrial model that we have that exists in the West, it is it operates outside what's communal. And I point this out oftentimes in my spiritual herbalism program when I'm talking to folks. I'll say stuff like, your doctor always says, you have this thing that's wrong with you. It's never associated to what's systematic within that particular community that's wrong. So oftentimes we'll hear, you have diabetes, right? And or you have arthritis, or you have cancer. We don't talk about why are the diabetic numbers within the specific community so high? Like, look at really what is systematically going on with the community that makes this individual then sick, right? Because those high diabetes numbers often come out from places where there are food deserts, places where there are a lack of access to fresh fruits, vegetables, clean water supply. And it's usually within communities that are really high stress. So if the community can recognize what its needs are and uplift what its needs are by having community healers, I believe that we can affect change. That's the way in which we affect change. As I was able to witness as a child, because by the time the doctors came on the weekend, most of us had our healing, our healing done, during the week by all the community healers that existed. And the doctors worked in tandem with the community healers. Never did they say that Uncle Habib or Auntie Sundar's work was not valuable. They were always like, oh, great, we're glad you're also functioning here, to help us work these things out. Quite unlike the West, where oftentimes we are so like telling our doctors that we're also using herbs, or telling our doctors that we're going to herbalists, or we're using alternative practices, which are in quotes, because really our practice is not alternative. I want to say that our practice is traditional. We are traditional medicine. Modern medicine is the alternative, right? Because they're 102 years old, but herbalism goes back before Christ even walked this earth, right? From the inception of man, there have been plants, and us using plants for healing. So it really is traditional medicine. But there's this fear about talking about other practices we might be doing, or other things we might be doing, because oftentimes people are like, oh my gosh, my doctor's not going to understand. And they don't. And when they they usually place it at a place that's way they're like, the medicine is the ultimate, and any other teaching, well, that's alternative, that's the supports that you would use, right? And in my community that I grew up, that was the medicine, and any other thing that we were using was the support that we were going to use. So it's really a way of reframing our thinking also in communities. Also, I feel, living in Brooklyn in the Flatbush community, I think studying spiritual herbalism is about empowerment. It's an opportunity for us to connect back to who we are. So many times that we migrate to the Americas, and so much of the migration itself is grief, right? So much of it is filled with grief about leaving your ancestral home behind, leaving everything that you've learned behind. And with grief comes illness. Grief causes respiratory illness, right? And can impact our immune system. So having somewhere where people can come in and really speak to the grief they hold in their bodies by creating Sacred Vibes Apothecary, this community healing space in Brooklyn, for me, it was an opportunity to give people a place, a safe space to speak about this connection that they were missing. And just to see that their eyes can light up by asking, like, what plant did you use with your ancestor? What is the, what do you remember your grandmother making, right? What is there something, any of these herbs that you remember your grandmother putting on the stove and boiling for you, or your aunt? I always talk about that one weird aunt that everyone seems to have, right? They always had plants around them, or were always boiling bush tea, or whenever you go to their house, they were trying to give you something crazy to drink. Well, that's me. I'm kind of that weird aunt. But yeah, I want to connect people back to that space where they can remember their own medicine. So generally what I hear is a lot of ginger. I hear a lot of lemongrass, cinnamon, garlic, onion, tulsi, nettles. Like, I love when folks can, you know, see that and just connect back to it. And instantly it creates this space that feels like they've connected back to their ancestry. And with that simple connection, that then opens up a door that folks can return to their ancestry, right? Start to look into their ancestry, but then return to nature, right? Return to nature, which to me is our gateway to spirit, or a gateway to source, or a gateway to God. Is like this return to nature. And to be in nature is when we start to hear really clearly. We start to witness the power of nature and realize that there's something bigger than us that exists. So it really facilitates. Spiritual herbalism is a return to spirit through nature, through your ancestry. And that is honestly what I believe that facilitates so much healing for myself, so much healing for family, and so much healing for the people that I work with in the community. And in Brooklyn, what that looks like is oftentimes community healers that exist beyond me. So, I tell folks the story of how I'm so grateful that there are community healers that are like, like for example, the person who practices Santeria that exists in their apartment, or the voodoo priest that practices voodoo in the back of a dollar store, or, I am so glad that these folks exist, because they're the ones that are really holding their communities together in multiple ways, right? And folks go to see these healers for all kinds of things, right? It's not just for the physical thing that's happening. It's also for like some spiritual thing that may be happening. Like someone may lose their job, right? And they're like, I need to go get something for losing my job. Or maybe someone may have someone locked up, facing facing this criminal justice system. They're also wanting to go to those healers. So all of those healers, the ones that I know, we work in tandem. Oftentimes they will say to me, what herb do you think? And I'll say, this herb, I think this herb would work well. And there's some things that I'm like, I can't help you with that. Oh my gosh, this is, but I'll send you here. So it's an opportunity to really use my community as a resource. And I believe that that's the transformation that is necessary for us. It's I speak in the book about a relational vision of health. And that relationship that I'm talking about is a relationship to yourself, a relationship to ourselves, which we can gain in understanding by using plants. When you use plant medicine, you're turned inward, not outward. You're turned inward. It gives you an opportunity to really look within yourself and see the changes that you may want to make. I often tell my students that plants do not lower their vibration to interact with us, but requires us to raise our vibration to interact with them. So when we start to work with plant medicine, what we'll often find is that we're changing, that our vibration is changing in order to interact with the vibration of the plant. And as such, you're developing a deeper relationship with self. So this relational vision of health is a deep relation with, a deep relationship with self, where we can start to understand what disease look like, right? So that we don't feel something without ease. Something in our spirit doesn't have ease. Something in our bodies don't have ease. But first it begins in the spirit that it doesn't have the ease, right? And then it transferred to your body, that now your body doesn't have ease. And that this ease is really something that's telling us about like what is not at ease in our emotions and in our relationship with spirit. So uh, this relationship that we have with ourselves, it's really about tapping into what's going on in the body. We then extend that relationship from self into a relationship with our families, right? Because then we start to be the one in the family that's making all the recommendations that people are calling and being like, and it's by example. So we don't study herbalism to be evangelical herbalists, right? So we don't go out there and say, you must take this plant, you have to be taking this plant. I teach that, your life is an example. Like the way your relationship with the plant then causes someone else to ask about that relationship with plants. So as an herbalist, you probably say, does all your family use herbal medicine? Actually not. Sometimes it takes them years to come around. Even though my sisters grew up in Guyana just like me, I'll say to them, well, I have something. If you need anything, I have something for that. But I always wait for them to ask. I'm never, you know, it's not my job to force my medicine on other people, but because of the way in which I live my life, they'll call and say, Karen, I haven't been able to sleep. Do you have something? And then I'll be like, absolutely. I'd love to share this with you. So it leads into this relationship with our families. From that relationship with our families, it just grows into a relational vision of health within our community. Um, and so many people that I've talked to about this ancestor journey have returned to their ancestor land in order to study a bit more, sit further in that knowledge, and that feels really great. So whether it's returning to your ancestor land here in the South, and really learning from that land, or it's returning to our ancestor land across the diaspora, or even going back home to Africa, it is all about connecting to the land, connecting to the ancestors, and connecting to the community. There's an importance there to uplift the work then of our ancestors by really naming that this was their work, by revering their work, by choosing who to share that work with is also really important. Because there needs to be reverence in the return to this work also, because so many people are just returning to this work in a really extractive way. So it's kind of like, teach me everything you know, and not really having a spirit of reciprocity. And so it's coming from a place of reciprocity. So, for me, when I return home to these ancestors' land, when I go home to Guyana, let's say, for example, I realize that I'll go home with a plan to learn medicine, and then I'll learn about the people, right? And that's okay, because I don't feel like there needs to be a time period in which I take in all of this, right? So if it takes me years to get to the plants, then I'm fine with that, because what I'm building relationship with is I'm building relationship also with my ancestral memory. So as I'm learning through storytelling, I find the storytelling is super, super rich and always somehow leads to me having a deeper understanding of myself and having a deeper understanding of the land itself that exists. Because now I'm talking to farmers about the soil. I'm talking about the rain when it comes. I'm talking about how things have ecologically changed since the time I was a child to who I am now. I'm talking about like what they're planting for which season, right? And really beginning to understand the planting season within the country before I even get to the medicine. So I think it's really important to, when we return, to revere these practices and revere our elders that are teaching these practices, and also begin to name them as we're going through these practices that we're learning. More so, I think one of the things that I'm going to probably end with is talking about how plants give us access to resilience, right? So plants teach us a lot about what it's like to be resilient. One of the stories I talk about in the art and practice of spiritual herbalism was after the bombing at Hiroshima, when the atom bomb was dropped. The first thing that was able to come back was the ginkgo tree, right? The ginkgo tree came back. Well, ginkgo is an air purifier, but also its roots purify the soil. And so that makes sense that why ginkgo tree was the first tree that was started to grow back. Ginkgo and birch both started to appear. And in herbalism, we use ginkgo and birch. We use birch a lot of times for cleansing the body, and we also use ginkgo for circulatory tonic throughout the body. And for me, I think it's the wisdom that exists in these plants that even after disaster, that they can once again come back after a given time, and they begin to heal the soil so that other plants could come back. Into that soil. And I think about the lessons there that they have, that these plants have to teach us about, our ability to show up as resilient beings, because a lot of us lost our ancestral connection. A lot of us lost our ancestral lesson because of our ancestors were enslaved and they couldn't even write. So, or show that they could write. And so therefore, a lot of our medicines were lost, right? So how do we come back even after the harsh lessons of colonization and enslavement within these communities to take us far away from our medicine? Well, I like to think that the memory that exists in us is just as resilient as the memory that exists in a birch tree, there's the memory that exists in a ginkgo tree, to know how to be able to come back and to be resilient people. So plant medicine teaches us how to be resilient, even through devastation in our families, devastation in our communities, devastation in land. Particularly like we're seeing that's happening in Gaza right now, we're noticing that there's devastation there. And so, we have to trust that there's remembrance of the land, remembrance of the plants, and certainly remembrance that's in our blood that will help us to create, help us to stay in contact and to create use our ancestral wisdom once again to create the healing that we need for ourselves and for communities. I'm just going to end by saying, this book, The Art and Practice of Spiritual Herbalism, was just that. I wanted it to be used as a tool for us to start to return to our ancestral wisdom and our ancestral connection, and really pay attention to what we believe that we were living with in our body, illnesses that we were living with in our body that we often say were hereditary, for us to take another look at it and really understand that it was a spiritual contract that we were living under, that we can choose to break, right? We can choose in this generation to break that spiritual contract, right? That karmic contract that we call hereditary, that we were living under. And not because our ancestors, or because your mom suffered from it, or your mom's mom suffered from it, or your dad's mom suffered for it, that you too also have to suffer from this same thing. That at any moment that we can grow in our understanding of self, that we can say, it ends with this generation. And I hope that you've received that. For those who've read this book, I hope that you've received that through here. Oftentimes, I will tie into the spirit of the Orishas because I love the connection to my ancestral practice, and showing the energy of the Orishas that live inside of us also. Because multiple times we think that the energy of plants, I'm also an astrologer, we think that the energy of planets and the energy of Orishas live outside of us. And by pulling them into our work in this way, we can see that our heart is related to the energy of Ogun. And so our heart has the power of this fieriness of an Ogun. It goes to war for us on a daily basis. And, pointing out how our respiratory system is related to the energy of a shoe. It really sits at the crossroads of our body and does so much regulation, what gets sent up to our ori and what gets sent down, right? So it's constantly at the crossroad in the body and speaking to us in that way. So the inclusion of the Orishas was to really be empower us to understand that not only do we have these powerful energies that exist outside of ourselves, but there's a representation of these powerful energies inside the body, and that can be truly empowering when we're faced with dealing with these lineage of healing. It's not anything that we could possibly do on our own, right? We have to call in all these energies, but understanding that you're also in the right place and are powerful enough, and probably are the one that's chosen, if you're on here, to heal your family. So I can open up for questions. Yeah, we're a little early, but I can spend time on questions.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For those of you here in the room and online, can you send to the chat, and then Jennifer will give me the questions to ask. Would anybody like to start with a question? Jackie? And then I'll come back to you, Elijah.
Thank you so much. That was amazing, Karen. I'm so sorry that I missed you a couple of years ago when you were at the Honeycomb Network, so I'm excited to be able to see you, and I really, really enjoyed your book. My name is Jackie Lazum. I'm a professor here, also in the African and Black Diaspora Studies program. I'm actually also a priestess of Oya religion, and so I was very lured by your title here. I'm not gonna lie. Coincidentally, my religious family is actually also from Brooklyn. And so, I connect a lot with what you're saying. My children, in fact, just recently in December, my children were also initiated. I have an older daughter who was initiated as a daughter of Ochun, and my younger daughter is a daughter of Owatala. They're both Yawos this year. My youngest is a Yawo in college at Howard. So we're very conscientious about the representation of Orishas right now, and the way that we appear in public. And so I guess my question to you really is about, this is something that has taken me this long. I'm fourth generation. My children are fifth generation in this religion, in the Americas, certainly. And I am so thrilled and happy to be able to speak this right now in ways that I wasn't able to speak about this the way that when I was growing up. And I find that I have mixed feelings about that, right? That on the one hand, this religion, the Lukumi religion specifically, but certainly all, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latin American, African-based religious practices, Ifa-based religious practices are so relational, like you said, and syncretic by necessity, right? That the same is not always returned, especially in a society that is so Christian based, right? And so Western religious based, Judeo Christian based, that there's still so much intolerance about what it represents, right? Even amongst our own communities. And so I'm wondering if in your work, you find yourself having to make accommodations for what our religion represents. If you find yourself having to disassociate it from religious practice. Because I find that, the more that we're able to talk about it, the more it actually becomes disassociated from the religion itself. So
yeah. Well, growing up in a super religious home, my mom embraced Christianity. And so growing up in a super religious home, you can imagine the church that my mom goes to exists in the community that I have a botanica in. So, I mean, when I opened my doors, like, because I grew up in that church, when I opened my doors, they would stop in and they'd be like, you know, what is there, just for my altar also that was in my window was kind of like they would just stop in. But what I recognized over time was they still stopped in anyway, just to be able to be like, how are you? And to hug me. And I was really worried, because I wondered what my parents would think of it, what if they would come to my shop at all. And then one day I went to my mom's house and she's like, I really love your botanica. And I was like, when did you go? Like, did you go? And she's like, yeah, I went there on Saturday. She goes, you did such a beautiful job. It's so beautiful in there. And yeah, and I was like, wow. So I think there's places that even the most religious people can still find the value of the existence, that still find the value of like this place of connection and community, and certainly the medicines. Because what happened over time was people started to, people from her church started to come to the apothecary to pick up medicines. um Whether or not they thought that it was spiritual medicine, but they would be like, I need this tea for this thing that I have, or I can't sleep, I'm going to get this, or I'm going to use this for my immune system. So over time, they started to come. And I agree with you that it's really about us continuing to have these conversations at all levels and being comfortable in it for ourselves. So, they are sometimes I'm the only person in a room that has this viewpoint, but I never shy away from sharing it, right? I never shy away from holding that space, and never shy away from saying what really the work is that I'm doing. And, I believe who's for me will find me. And those that don't, it's protection. So I strongly believe that too. So like the rooms that I'm able to show up in are for me, and the rooms that I'm not in are therefore for my protection.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. So I'll go to Elijah, and then we have a question online that we'll do. So, Micaiah?
Yeah, I'll let the other people go first. That you already called on. I can go after them.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Elijah. I don't know if you can hear me. Back.
Yes, I can.
Oh,
I can hear you.
Yeah, my name is Elijah. I'm a first-year student. One of the reasons why I was really interested in having you as a guest speaker, or just hearing you as a guest speaker, is I've recently been sort of accumulating knowledge on herbalism and beginning a practice in hoodoo. And one of the things that's really challenging for me is, as an African American, like I don't really have that much of a connection to like my ancestors, because obviously the Atlantic slave trade kind of wiped away my whole ethnic identity. So there's that. And then also just in my personal life, within my own family, we're not as tight knit as most other families. And so there's sort of a disconnect between my own lineage, and there's a difficulty that I'm finding with being called to a practice that is so heavily steeped in community. And so I guess my question to you is, where do you what's the advice that you would give to people who have that calling but don't necessarily have a community to begin that practice?
I think it begins by creating what you want to see. For me, when I realized that, there was like community needs to happen, like healing needs to happen within communities, I started to reach out to other healers in my community to create that space, right? So even though they weren't coming into my apothecary, I was certainly making appointments to see them. And some days I'd have to wait, like these spiritual healers in Brooklyn, let me tell you, you go at 9 o'clock, they'll see you at 6. You wait all day, right? You sit in, wait all day, and it's not in comfortable conditions. You're like sweating in the back, like I said, in the back of a dollar store, sweating, sitting on a mattress. I don't know, whatever. But I did, I made the effort to get to know the healers that are in my community. I also wanted to create a space for other people. So I created my apprenticeship program where other people can have community to also be with each other and talk about the experiences that they were going through within that apprenticeship program. So it's sometimes seeking out community where you feel like you don't have any, you have to create it for yourself, right? The second part of that is that, oftentimes when we begin this conversation with relatives, we go into it like, so tell me about, did you use a plant? What herbalism knowledge did your ancestors have? And they're not as willing, or it doesn't even come to them in that way. What that looks like is building a relationship with them and then understanding their journey of, like if something comes up, it naturally comes up, but there's more effort into building a relationship with the family member, right? And so for me, what that looks like, strengthening my relationship with my mom, then my mom started to open over time and be like, you know, when you were being born, they gave me this bush because for the pain, or, you know, when you were growing up, all the stories started to come up, right? All the stories started to come up. And now, like in my family, when they see me, it's like they kind of lead with the herbalism story because they see my work. So I don't have to dig as deeply. They're like, oh, did you know this plant is? I'm like, yes, well, you know, from all the aunts and stuff like that. So I definitely feel it's like allowing the conversation to come up over time, not such a direct approach, but also creating what we want to see.
Thank you. So Jennifer, can you read the one from online, and then I'm coming back to you, Nikaya.
Yes. So, thank you, Ms. Rose, for this conversation.
You're welcome, Jennifer.
It's from Farm Director, and they write, as a spiritual herbalist, what is the ultimate goal, and how close are you to reaching it?
Is this question for Chris? Is this Christopher?
Yes.
Farm Director.
Yes.
Because that's Christopher is one of my apprentices. So what's what's the goal? What's your goal, Christopher? But the goal for me, I think, you know, I feel like my goalpost changes all the time in spiritual herbalism. But one thing, my value remains the same. And the mission is deeply connected to it. And you know, I'm going to start with the mission. I think the mission is to have an herbalist in each home. And it's as simple as that. Like, have a healer in each home that could be addressing what's coming up for the family, and then be able to pass that information on. So having a medicine keeper, a medicine holder, a healer in each home is super important to me. That comes from the value that our ancestral technology is deeply, deeply valuable, right? Our ancestral knowing, our medicine is what this world is trying to get to, is what this world pays a lot of money for, is what this world will uplift with AI and all of these other things when we already have ancestral connection. You know, you know, last summer, my students taught a workshop called Ancestral AI, because our ancestors have always been using technologies outside these dimensions for communication. So what the Western world is now catching up to, we have been doing for such a long time. And then these practices become commodified and sold back to us. And so for me, I understand the value of my ancestral connection. I understand the value of my ancestral technology, and everything else, you know, is all my goals then carry out, you know, go on that. So my ultimate goal is to have that healer in each home, and to make information more and more and more and more accessible, like to, you know, yeah, so that, you know, that there's every family that exists on this globe has that connection.
Nobody? Okay, so we should go to the online question then? Yeah.
Sylvia Spencer asks, greetings from Austin, Texas. Thank you for this knowledge sharing. What are your top 5 plants that you would recommend to grow in a community healing garden?
Yeah, and you know, and so I love this. Journalists have asked me these questions in the past. Could you name us your top 10 favorite plants? And I'm like, top 10 favorite? You got to be kidding me. I have like a top 400 favorite, but okay. But you know, the thing is that's important is seasonal healing. Seasonal healing, right? So my top 5 plants, you know, could be great for what's happening right now in this season, and my top 5 plants will change in the summer, and it will change in the fall again, because I'm, you know, a person who moves by season, right? Looking at like what my body might be needing for the season that it's in. Having said that, I realize that in this specific time, that we're needing a lot of nervous system support, and that's the work. You know, that's the Orisha that I talk about. Oya here, right? It's really an important time in how Oya is traversing at this time. So, you know, our nervous system needs a lot of support, and so these are easy plants to grow that you can actually feel it in your body. So, if I were to name 5, I would say catnip. I would say a lot of the mint, or the plants that come from the Laminaceae family, which is the mint family, are easy to grow, and is often considered weeds and are super useful for our nervous system. So catnip is one of those plants. I love that, and it grows really well. Lemon balm, which is a mint-like peppermint plant, but with a lemony taste and smell. So lemon balm is really good for our nervous system, but also the nervous system of children. So if you have kids, it's really great kid medicine. Both catnip and lemon balm is really good kids medicine, with not a lot of contraindications, meaning that, you know, most people can take it. Like even if folks are taking um, a pharmaceutical, they can still drink a cup of lemon balm tea, and they could still drink a cup of catnip tea. Peppermint, I also love, or spearmint, peppermint or spearmint. Chamomile could be a really beautiful one to also grow with peppermint and spearmint. And what would be the fifth one that I would say? You know, I want to say nettles because I love nettles, but it stings. So you probably would have to plant it in a container or like at the side of your garden that people doesn't mind, you know, like wouldn't sting people when they walk past. But nettles is this really deeply nutritive plant. So if you're dealing with like anemia, exhaustion, which so many of us are exhausted, right, because of the world in which we live, or the way in which we've also, our lives have had to be structured just to survive. There's a general exhaustion that we're facing. And nettles is really this beautiful, nourishing plant that we can, it has, you know, we call it an herbal multivitamin in our program. It's packed with vitamin and minerals. And so if you can start to grow some of that you can use every day to strengthen your body, that could be super helpful too.
Very good. Yes.
Hi, my name is Santua Panwadie, and I'm a professor here at DePaul. And I want to thank you for your book that I just ran into quite by accident, but ended up being like an oasis, just even from the colors, everything was the way it felt, right? And it just became a safe space. I honestly keep it by my bed. I don't know how I forgot it, but yeah, just keep it by my bed to look at and to go through. And I just wonder, you know, in the capacity of a giver and a healer, are there books like that that you go to, or places? I heard that you said that you see other healers in your community, which I think is just such great advice for all of us. But are there books like that, places or music that you go to deal with the nerves and to be rested and at peace?
I guess I should probably start with the music. I'm from the Caribbean, so I listen to you know, you can't be mad and listen to soca music. I don't know what it is. Like you can't, like there's nothing, soca music never talks about heartbreak or stuff like that. It just talks about having fun all the time. Right? So I'm like, when the days are hard, that's what I'm listening to. It's never about, oh, someone is missing. They're just like, oh, someone is missing. Let's go party. Okay, great. So that's something that keeps me up, is listening to a lot of soca music from the Caribbean. But I also, you know, lean into, when I found Elder Malidoma Some's work, I thought I'd come home. So the work of other healers, so that's like important. One of my most important teachers is Elder Malidoma Some, who is now passed on. But his book, Community, The Healing Wisdom of Africa, is beautiful when speaking about community and community work. I also really lean in on Of Water and Spirit. You know, his initiation work there, I find that that's really, those are two books that I would recommend right off the bat when talking about community and spiritual healing.
Very good. We have one more online, and then I'll come in person here.
So this one is from an anonymous participant. They say, greetings, Mama Karen from Philly. My question is, how do you keep learning and seek knowledge on all the things you do?
Yeah.
Oh.
Extra. Yeah, there is a lot happening, but I have to say that when you love your work, it feels like you're just living. So at this time in my life, it feels like I'm stepping into a space where as I'm living, I'm learning, because I delve into, I also think that it's my makeup, but I can delve into a study of something that I'm like, I've always been wanting to know more about this, right? And then allow myself to be led wherever that study takes me. and creating space for that, creating time in my day for that, to what is the thing that I'm wanting to study now, and be able to create some time from all the hectic stuff of the day. So whether it's like leaving an hour in the morning or leaving an hour in the evening, or maybe even 2 hours if you can get that throughout your day, to say like, this is the thing that I'm most interested in learning now, and then just to step fully into that. Yeah, and all of the things that I do are also study for me, because I teach an apprenticeship program several nights a week. And when teaching that program, I'm also teaching myself. Like, so many times as I'm receiving downloads from spirit and I'm teaching the material, it's a great reminder to myself about what I might be needing, about learning this plant even more, and after teaching this material for almost 20 years, what I find is that sometimes I'm teaching a plant and then I'm like, wait a minute, I never knew this plant would work like this. So the plant is always showing me something that I am ready to take in at this time in my vibration. Like, something opens up in me that I can now see clearer. So we're always in this relationship of, let me show you this year, and next year I'm going to show you something different. So I'm just open to receiving like that.
Right, and our last question.
Hi. So you mentioned that when it comes to spaces that you're able to tell your story, tell your narratives in, and teach, then that's one way that you protect yourself. But sometimes the spaces you aren't allowed into is also a way that you consider, okay, it's being protected. But besides the being allowed in spaces and not being allowed in spaces, what else can you do to protect yourself as a healer and as a giver? Because there are takers on the other side of that.
There's so many takers, and we really want to understand why there's takers. There's takers because people want this information and they don't know how to access it, right? So a lot of times people will show up to you in ways that are definitely just draining, right? They're definitely like taking everything you have and not giving any care to what you may be going through in that time. So yes, always, always, always protect yourself. Never leave home without it, meaning that every time, from the time you wake up, you're calling in protection. But the ways that we could also carry something on us that's very protective. So there's lots of plants that we can carry on us. Nettles. We could plant nettles in our yard to protect our home. We can carry a piece of nettle in our pocket to protect us as we walk around. We could sleep with nettles under a pillow to protect our spirit from traveling out of our body or from psychic attacks. We can make a bath out of nettles and take a bath in it to create a protective shield. We could cleanse ourselves in the evening with peppermint and spray peppermint on our bodies from the energies that we've received for the day, so that we don't have to go to bed with that energy. So it's, there's protection that's always existing out there with plants, but this awareness of it is where, most people struggle with this awareness of like, let's call it in before we leave home. Let's take the time after we come home from work to release everything we're carrying. Before you set up and enter the new week, light a candle, take a bath, get into the space of what your week may be demanding of you. And then you release that. We're coming up to a full moon in Leo this weekend, a great time to like release what we may have been carrying. And so like plan out like, okay, full moon is coming. What's the ritual that I'm going to do to release all the other energies that I've been carrying? And then what's the other ritual to protect myself from the energies that might be coming at me?
Right. Well, we have come to the end of this program. Thank you so much for your wisdom.
You're so welcome.
And thanks to all of you who attended online and those of you who are here. We're done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.